probably the biggest single struggle is finding that creative voice and figuring out, who you are as an artist. I think that informs everything else. And that has to be the single biggest roadblock or hurdle. It dictates, the type of clients you go for, how you structure your business. That's everything. Who are you as a creative, as a photographer, as a filmmaker?
Hello and welcome to the Photo Forward podcast, the weekly show where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest photographers and visual storytellers the world over. From their photographic origin stories to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, cinematographer, or multimedia creator. We uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. All right, a few little housekeeping notes off the bat. Yes, the Photo Forward podcast is back in action. With everything going on in the world and our country over the last year, it was definitely a time to take a step back and put focus elsewhere. As both a creator and a journalist and, hell, a human, to spend my mental and creative energy where it made sense. Part of that meant putting a pause on the podcast during 2020 and the greater part of 2021 as I re-examined my network of photographers and creators that I was connected with, and whom among them I could collaborate with in interview format on episodes for all of you. I'll be making a more concerted effort to bring in a broader and more diverse range of voices this year in 2021 and into the future. As I mentioned before hitting the pause button last year, this podcast and the small community of followers I have online is a platform. And with that comes a responsibility to share, promote, and connect with a more diverse group of creators. If you're not part of the solution, I do believe that you're part of the problem. Second, I want to make this year a lot more collaborative on the Photo Forward podcast and incorporate a lot more Q&A or AMA style elements into it. I've been connecting recently with some more junior photographers and getting these brilliant, spontaneous questions that come up in our conversations, and it made me realize just how strong the curse of knowledge is in our industry. We get really skilled at certain things and come to assume that everyone must know that, and then as a consequence, do a really awful or negligent job of explaining that elsewhere. So, if you got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I'll respond to AMA style, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect, or send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media. I'd love to make this a weekly element in each show, maybe after the main interview, on whatever is on your mind creatively, photographically, nagging career questions, etc. Send them over at photoforward.media/connect or connect@photoforward.media. I cannot wait to hear what's on your mind and the great questions that I know are going to come up and bring some more value to all of you listening to the podcast. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who's listening, subscribing, and dropping a rating or review on the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It means so much to me to really start creating a community around the show. So if you want to hear more inspiring and creative shows like we've been producing, please head over to your podcast app of choice and give Photo Forward a review or a rating to help make this show reach an even larger audience around the world. All right, let's get into the show. One of the core questions I'm always looking to find answers to on this show is, what makes a brilliant visual creator? Is it the grasp of technical aspects like lighting, composition, movement, or a personal skill or special gift of connecting with the individuals in your image? There's obviously a nearly infinite number of talented photographers out there. So what gives certain shooters a true visual voice? Well, today's guest is such a brilliant example of forging that visual voice, that photographic identity, that brand, by melding artistic influences to create, as Aristotle so brilliantly said, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Chris McDuffie, born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, is the founder and visionary behind Chris McDuffie Photography. Chris became interested in photography while studying business and marketing education at the University of Minnesota, which ultimately led to his entrepreneurial spirit to start his own photography business shortly after graduation. He's been fortunate to land jobs with companies including Activision, Cargill, Fairview, Minnesota Timberwolves, Target, ESPN, Nike, Bumble, GQ, and the New York Times, just to name a few. Chris has been recognized by the Minnesota Fashion Awards in 2015 and the Beautiful Humans Award in 2017. Since beginning his company, it has been his mission to bring creativity, honesty, and humor to both consumers and commercial clients. Being a lifelong artist, his creative taste and aesthetic eye has been shaped by a rich tapestry of music, galleries, and theater in the Twin Cities. When not engrossed in his work, Chris loves to spend time with his illustrious wife, Vanessa. In today's episode, Chris and I had such a perfect back and forth about creative inspiration, what it means to constantly re-examine and hone your craft, and so critically, building genuine relationships and networks across skills, across genres, and across creative styles to uplift the whole creative community. As always, show notes and links to other episodes of the Photo Forward podcast can be found online at photoforward.media/podcast. So, time for me to get out of the way and into today's beautiful episode with commercial and editorial photographer, Chris McDuffie. Chris McDuffie, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot of different directions I want to go in today's interview, but I guess kind of a nice place to start would just be kind of where you found photography as your career. What was kind of the how did you get involved in photography early on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a kid, I always had little disposable cameras that I'd use for, going on vacation or around the house. Nothing in a creative capacity, but I guess there was always a camera in the house. That progressed into doing like home movies as a young kid with friends and by myself, doing stuff with G.I. Joes and pretending to play cops and robbers, things of that nature. After that, I kind of got away from photography and film and got into other creative endeavors. So I was always drawing and painting as a kid or working with clay. I was a band nerd for a number of years. So I always had, some kind of creative outlet. When I was in college, I was doing sneaker customization. So painting and fabricating on shoes, and kind of got involved in this, at the time, was a really cool underground community of artists that were doing sneakers, and to engage with those folks and also to put it out in the world for competitions and client work. I had to take pictures of the shoes. So I found myself picking back up a camera. I soon thereafter kind of left the sneaker game behind, which now that I look at how it's valued, that was probably not the best career decision. I mean, you got 13-year-olds that are day trading in sneakers for 7 figures. This is wild, but I'm happy where I'm at. So, after college, picked up a camera, started with classmates, taking pictures of people in my dorm room. And that progressed into doing stuff for local publications. So I did a lot of nightlife work downtown Minneapolis in particular, kind of built up a client list from there. Got around town, learned who some of the movers and shakers and business owners and those folks were. And, the rest, I guess, is history.
As they say, the 10-year overnight success.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, we'll get into some of your kind of more recent work, but I'd love to kind of touch on some of your early attraction to photography, just kind of get into your head a little bit. Like, was one of your parents more of the photographer in the family and just kind of saw it and just osmosed it that way?
Neither one of them. Actually, my grandfather was into photography. He was a hobbyist, which I didn't really know about until it was closer to when he passed, which is, I don't know, that was really weird, having at that time maybe 6 years of a career before he was like, hey, I used to take pictures. Here's some old cameras and old, light stands that you may or may not have any use for. So I think that was interesting learning that was his thing, and I've been able to carry on that legacy.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I think a lot of photographers kind of have that. There's that one old camera, that old rangefinder or something that they were given by a family member that just has a sort of special place.
I love hearing those stories. I wish I had one of those stories. I kind of fell into this just being a creative and trying a bunch of different stuff. Just a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, and I think it kind of shows in your work that you are a very kind of multifaceted creative. Like there's a lot of there's the music side, there's the sort of fashion. It seems like it's a really strong part of your work. It's you're incorporating a lot of different creative elements into the photography itself, as opposed to sort of the more straight photographers that are just kind of that's what they do. They eat, sleep, think cameras. And it seems like you're incorporating a lot of sort of other creative elements into your work.
I think for me. It's always been important to have all those other creative elements inform the work. I mean, that's what keeps me interested
Mm-hmm.
is getting away from photography and just getting out into the world and life and relationships and having all those things inform the work that I do.
What are some of the sort of your creative inspirations that you're pulling from in your work? I think, for some people's it's museums, it's looking at old artwork. What sort of creative inspirations do you pull from into your photography and video work?
Yeah, I mean, pre-COVID, definitely it was going out to museums, especially with my wife and events and galas and uh, photographers that have come before me.
Hmm.
It was really cool getting to meet Alex Soth in college. I had,
Hmm.
maybe one or two photography classes in college. I went to the U of M, and being able to meet Alex Soth in his studio, that was a huge push. Just to be like, you can actually do this as a career.
Hmm.
Um, Beyond that, just kind of getting out into nature, getting out in the world, just really being open to whatever encounters I like coming in contact with.
Hmm. So kind of that experience in college was that first moment when you thought, maybe this can be a career. Maybe I can make money doing it. Was it that, or did it come before that?
That was a huge push.
Hmm.
I honestly, I don't think that there was one singular moment.
Hmm.
If I'm really looking at it, when I got out of school, it was during the crash,
Hmm.
and like I had applied to I don't know how many different jobs. Like I'm a recent grad, nothing
Hmm.
was hitting. I was just like, well, I've kind of been dabbling in this photography thing. Why not? Why not give it a go? So out of school, registered the business, and I suppose it was more out of necessity than anything.
Yeah, I mean you make it sound so matter of fact, but that seems like a pretty big risk to kind of make that your sole focus just coming out of school.
It was yes and no. I
Hmm.
mean, out of school, I moved back into home with our mom and sister for a couple of years just
Hmm.
to figure out what life was. I had a decent cushion at the time,
Hmm.
but moving out on my own was that was a little bit scarier, especially with just photography.
Hmm.
I had a couple of years where it was lean. Things weren't quite taking off. I had a number of part-time jobs to kind of supplement some of the client work that I was doing. Been full-time for about 7 years now, so
Hmm.
kind of found my wings.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of misconceptions, I think, because part of the audience for this podcast is kind of newer creators, people starting out, and I think there's this conception that's like, oh well, everybody's just got it together so well, and it's like, well, it it was never like that starting out. I think every photographer that you see nowadays that seems like they have it together, there was the early rough days, of course.
Do we have it together? Yeah, I don't know.
Hell, I don't know.
Last year was 10 years in business,
Hmm.
and as much as I love what I do and have been able to build a very nice career and have really awesome clients, like what keeps me interested in this is the idea that I don't know what I'm doing, and there's always something new to learn, and you kind of get up every day like what new thing can I discover through this medium.
I love that. I love that. I definitely think that way too. To me, there's no such thing as being a perfect photographer. And that's kind of the great part about it. It's kind of this infinite game that we were always trying to figure out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, we're touching about some of the sort of your early days. I just not specific to early days, but what would you say has been kind of like the biggest struggle in your career?
Oh my goodness. How much time do we have? Yeah, I would say the probably the biggest single struggle is finding that creative voice and
Hmm.
figuring out, who you are as an artist. I think that informs everything else. And I'd say maybe the past year and a half have kind of come into my own where I feel comfortable with having a creative voice.
Hmm.
Um, that has to be the single biggest roadblock or hurdle. It dictates, the type of clients you go for, how you structure your business. That's everything. Who are you as a creative, as a photographer, as a filmmaker?
Hmm. And you feel like you were kind of being who you needed to be for the clients in the past, and now it's kind of different. Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's always about falling forward,
Hmm.
and I've fallen forward enough to figure out, who I am, the type of things that I'm really interested in, the type of projects that I want to take on moving forward.
Explain a little bit what you mean by that, by falling forward.
I think it's rooted in me trying out a lot of different things creatively, where I'm just always experimenting. I'm always trying different things. I never want to be, held back by if it's gear, if it's an idea. I just want to try different things, try different genres, and just being open to not getting it and being okay with the fact that I'm going to fail. It's going to suck. The first couple of years, creatively or in business, they're horrible. They totally suck. You have no clue what you're doing. Things don't work. Nobody wants to hire you. You haven't technically got a hold of the gear so that the images that you're making match the images in your mind.
Mhm.
And part of me has to be okay with that and just accepts that level of failure. Like I'll get there eventually, but I don't have it yet. But just keep trying. Just that tenacity and always pushing forward is really important.
Is that, I mean, that's obviously a lesson for younger photographers. Do you think that us more established people, how do you get through to us that maybe have been doing this for a while and maybe have stopped taking risks? I think, like you said a little bit, it's kind of the other side of the coin of finding a creative voice is sometimes you get kind of crystallized into that creative style. How do folks like us who have been around for a little bit longer not get stuck in our ways and keep experimenting, keep trying, keep failing?
Yeah, absolutely. One big thing for me over the past few years has been pushing more into doing video and video
Hmm.
production. So, the photography is something that I've gotten very comfortable with. There's my voice, there's an aesthetic. Technically, I've got that down, but how else can I apply that to, another creative field or business? And for me, that was doing video. You're good at making still images. Now go be a good storyteller.
Was there a particular project that was sort of the genesis of saying, you're like, all right, I'm gonna really dive in head first on this video thing and make this part of my creative process, my creative work?
Wow, there wasn't one project. It's always been something for me that's in the back of my mind. Like I love stories. I love watching movies. Love commercials. I love the moving image. I think from a technical standpoint, there are a lot of roadblocks that kind of kept me from going full force with photography. I feel like there's a lot lower barrier to entry. Whether it's the cameras or lighting or what have you, it's easier to get into photography than it is to get into video. That kept me at bay for quite a while. But I think the technology for video has evolved so fast over the past few years that it's kind of where when I got into photography, it is now for video. Like the tech is so cheap and so good. It's a lot easier to master it.
It's kind of now the equipment can't be your excuse anymore.
Not at all. Not at all. No, no.
And when you started incorporating video into that, I mean, how are you, were you learning from someone, or is it kind of just on the fly learning, YouTube, that sort of stuff? what was, as you were incorporating that into your sort of plethora of work, like what was was there a process to that?
Absolutely. I would say it was all the above. So just kind of being self-taught is very important. Being curious is important. Trial and error, experimenting with different things was part of it. Being able to be a still photographer on a lot of film sets definitely helps. Like nothing beats being on set. So getting hired by DPs or directors to do the still portion of a campaign really helps because you learn how people run their sets. You learn how people light, how they use gear, how they communicate, how the day is run. And then there's a lot to be said for how much really good free information is available online. I'm definitely a student of YouTube University. There's so many amazing creators that are constantly putting out good content.
That's really interesting that you mention being a still photographer on a video set as a way to kind of learn the craft, learn how those things function. It's not, when you say it, it sounds so obvious, but I know so many still photographers that are trying to sort of break into video and there's no sort of easy path. And that's actually kind of brilliant. Was there any particular examples that you kind of are memorable ones that you want to share?
No, those ones aren't often that exciting. I think some of the music videos are kind of cool. Just creatively, you get to do some different stuff. Beyond that's a lot of rather dry commercial work, which it pays the bills, pays well. It's nice to get paid to be on set and to learn video while you're doing stills.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that for anybody listening that's looking to break in, that's a great way. If you've gotten stills down to a degree where you're competent and comfortable and you can make some really nice pictures on the fly, doing stills for film sets is a great way to learn about film.
So we've been kind of touching on getting into that video thing and building up your career. Are there any particular kind of mentors that you've had, more established photographers, videographers that you've kind of looked up to, and kind of what have been some of those lessons from that?
Yeah, I'd definitely say here in the Twin Cities, there's a lot of amazing shooters, both on the still and video side. A lot of great photographers, a lot of great DPs, a lot of great directors. And every set that I'm fortunate to get on, I learned something different from all of them. Some of the more important things to learn is how people run sets. Like being efficient is everything when you've got so many people on a set and there's a lot of moving parts and you got to get through a lot of shots. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It's important to learn from folks how they lead a team.
Are there any particular kind of things that you saw and you're like, God, that's brilliant, I need to keep that in mind when I'm directing, or kind of what would have been some of those lessons you've learned as far as kind of managing a team, as it were?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for pre-pro and just going into a project with a really solid plan. So by the time you get on a set, even if things don't go exactly in the direction that you want to go, I mean, stuff always happens, and there's whatever the saying about best laid plans are. Just going into a situation with a game plan kind of helps keep everybody on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then beyond that, actually being on set, just having good set etiquette. I've not been on a lot of really huge sets, they're kind of smaller to mid-sized productions, but whether or not anyone says this, it's kind of an all hands on deck outfit where, even if I'm not hired to do a job, if I can be of an assistance to someone else, that goes a long ways.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of the classic example in like corporate America of you never say, well, that's not my job.
Yeah, absolutely not. No.
We've touched on the fact that we're having this conversation during COVID times. This is January 2021 to date the podcast a bit. How have you been sort of staying motivated, creative during, what has been a really challenging, past year, essentially, for photographers and for everybody really, but for you personally, like what have you been doing to stay creative, to challenge yourself, to move forward during all of this?
Yeah, I think whenever I've got that downtime, and that happens for creatives, that's kind of the journey. just taking that opportunity to take a really critical look at yourself, at your business, at what you're doing, that means the world. I, I probably could have used a little bit more downtime to spruce up things like the website and some marketing materials. I mean, I from last year in 2020, we went into lockdown. Obviously no one was working, but I would say come June, people were ready to get back to work, and projects were coming in pretty regularly, and I've been going pretty strong since June of last year.
Hmm.
But having that downtime definitely helps to slow things down, audit your process, audit everything. If I'm not working on a production or shooting, I just, again, getting out in nature, going for a hike, going for a walk, going for a run. Droning, that's been a big thing to introduce into my tool boxes. Getting into drones, that's been really cool to view the city in a different way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when it's some of our only time outside, and back in the day, it's like, well,
Yeah,
get a new perspective on the city.
yeah, that's been really fun.
Mm-hmm. What are there any particular things about kind of how you've kind of re-examined your business, your processes, all of that? Any specifics that kind of spring to mind that you've looked at or kind of reevaluated during this last year or so?
Yeah, as a prior to last year, I was still kind of in a space of spreading myself really thin and taking on a lot of things. I definitely was not someone who would say no. So at least not often. So I would do your headshots as well as your brand awareness campaign, as well as commercial shoots. If you needed a portfolio for an actor, actress, model, I could do that. And I realized that wasn't fulfilling
Mm.
creatively. Uh, Taking on a lot of smaller jobs doesn't leave you a lot of room to focus on the bigger ones. And maybe that's another silver lining coming out of COVID is not having a lot of those little jobs forced me to figure out that I didn't want to do them anymore. And those are now things that I will happily pass along. Network with a lot of amazing creatives that can do all those things. But I think for me, the focus now is kind of swimming upstream and looking for bigger opportunities, bigger projects, more responsibility in that world.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it was also maybe in some ways diluting the brand a little bit, in that you were kind of taking on a lot of different little things?
Absolutely, and it's tough to be seen by bigger brands or corporations as somebody that can handle a bigger project when you do a lot of little stuff. So it's nice to now have that focus and be able to turn down a lot of work that doesn't resonate with where I'm trying to go.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I think it's forced a lot of us to kind of say, "Oh God, is it really worth it to do this little kind of dinky project, for lack of a better term? Is this really worth it for my career, for my health, even?"
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the good thing with where we are is there's a lot of creatives, and they're very hungry and very capable of doing that work. So it's nice that there's such a range of creatives here in town.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And getting into that a little bit, I mean, what are some of the ways you've kind of built your network, your creative network, as far as, I guess we can go in two directions here, is partly in terms of fellow creatives and partly in terms of clients. So why don't we kind of start with a little bit of how you've been building your network of prospective clients, and kind of marketing yourself, because marketing isn't a dirty word on this podcast.
That's good. That's good to hear. No, it's I would say it's always been a very organic process. Like it's not been the door to door sales type. It's not a lot of, or really any, cold calling. It's really based on existing relationships and people that I know, be they other photographers and creatives. And that conversation I see is kind of one and the same. The same way that I network with other creatives, the same way that you find new clients. It's really tapping your own network and keeping in touch with people. If it's a new house or a new baby or a new job opportunity, congratulating folks, reaching out to people kind of out of the blue, checking up on them, seeing how they're doing. I think that very organic, natural way to network is what brings a certain type of clientele to me.
And is that change? Is this? I mean, have you gotten perhaps better at that during COVID times, where that's kind of the only interaction some of us might have?
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as I love being in front of people face to face, that's not as much of an option to do now. But it's still something that I love. Like whether it's a Skype or a Zoom call or a phone call or an email or message, like I'm always open to checking up on people.
It's good. I think it's appreciated by a lot of people. It's simple, but it's extremely effective to just, even like writing a letter to people. Crazy idea. Like a favorite client that you've had, just checking in with them. Even that simple act can go a long way.
It really does. And yeah, I think why that's so successful is just it's being top of mind. Like folks have busy lives. We're in a global pandemic. There's so much other things to worry about than how I'm doing, and if I'm looking for work. So just being proactive and reaching out to people to stay top of mind definitely works.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then that's kind of, you've kept that up throughout the pandemic of just kind of being there for people, connecting with people. For kind of other photographers that are working on kind of rekindling some relationships with past clients, what are some best practices you think for trying to do that?
That's a good question. Pre-COVID times, it was very easy to get out and about around town and go to events and meet people that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same idea applies if you're not able to see people face to face. It's just being very warm and figuring out an electronic way to do that. This could easily segue into another tactic of social media and really leveraging social media. I encourage a lot of creatives to get on things like a LinkedIn and spruce up your profile and reach out to people who you want to connect with, who are the art directors or creative directors or whoever at certain businesses or organizations. It's the same thing. It's finding a very warm, personable way to reach out, even if it is through a message or an email.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about kind of client acquisition, marketing, all of that. Again, not dirty words here. It's stuff you have to talk about if you want to consider yourself a business in photography. So why don't we touch a little bit on some of kind of the memorable projects that you have in your portfolio that I really liked. How did you get connected with Timberwolves? That seems like a really interesting little kind of portrait series and an ongoing relationship that you have there. So why don't we touch a little bit about, how you got started connected with them and tell people a little bit about it.
Yeah, that started a number of years ago. They used to do swimsuit calendars with the cheerleaders, the Wolves dancers, a number of years ago. And they were in a place where they had a photographer they were working with. They weren't really happy with the work they were getting. They wanted to bring in some new blood. So I went in to interview with the head of the ENT, the entertainment department. It felt good, like things went well. But I guess they had word from higher ups that they didn't want to shake things up, or they weren't really ready to move in a different direction. But thanks for the interview. I was just happy to be in a room.
Mm-hmm.
Like to get an email from the Timberwolves, it was just like, oh, I've made it. I made it. This is it. I heard back from them a week later, like, well, things aren't going well with the photographer, and we're gonna take a chance on you. And that started a years-long relationship with that organization, which has been great. Like everyone that I've ever had contact with at the Wolves organization has been incredible. They're very, very professional. They love what they do. They're very knowledgeable about sports and the world of sports. So from the going from swimsuit calendars and bikinis, did that for a number of years, and they're like, well, you do this well, would you like to come in and shoot some of the players on like a media day? And of course I said yes. No hesitation. And that started me coming in on the media days to shoot the players. One of the biggest, one of my career highs from that was the Prince jersey. They have like a series of city jerseys that they put out every year, and they did a Prince jersey one year, and that went wild. I think they won like a Clio awards for advertising that year. So that was definitely a huge milestone for me.
As a lifelong Minnesotan, I loved seeing those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what did that? So going back to it, that started out as essentially a cold email to their entertainment department, or how did you get that first foot in the door?
They found me, I believe it was through a woman who was a mutual contact who did the swimsuits at the time. She was supplying the swimsuits for the calendars.
Okay.
And was like, we were friends. She said, well, reach out to this Chris guy. I think there's a lot to be said for word of mouth. As much as we could talk about other tactics of marketing, like your network is your net worth. Like finding the people that that you have a personal connection with, those are the people that you want to find work from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And does that just come from, I know one thing I like to be able to do is like you said, when there's a project that's not quite for me, I love to be able to pass that on to somebody that I know and trust and all of that to take it on. Has that been something that you just kind of have incorporated, and that has helped kind of expand that network of creatives in your world?
That's absolutely a very important part of, my network is if there is a job that's out of my wheelhouse, or, the timing doesn't match up, having somebody that I know and trust that I can refer to that job is huge. And, I've certainly got plenty of jobs that way. I've gotten jobs from other photographers, whether they're much more seasoned and it was a job that, maybe they aren't at that level anymore. They've moved past doing that type of work. It's nice that I know them and that I can get those projects.
And it seems like as you look through your body of work, it seems like you've mentioned, it started out more as a little more in kind of fashion, it seems like, and it seems like there's been sort of this gradual progression towards more storytelling. Is that a fair assessment, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been interested in fashion since a teenager. I used to design clothing back in high school. And as I've gotten older, my interests have grown. I've gotten out into the world a little bit more and traveled around some, and you get interested in different things. And it's cool now to be able to tell really intimate stories.
Mm-hmm. And that's really a big part of this audience too. It started out very narrow as photojournalists, visual storytellers, and it's becoming a bigger tent that people are sitting under to be a visual storyteller. It's not necessarily just those AP photographers, those war zone documentarians. It's kind of bringing in that storytelling into whatever you're shooting is becoming. It's so much more than a trend. It's really the key to being an effective photographer. Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of things that have driven that, but I think that people are just hungry for stories. They're hungry for connection, especially now during COVID, when a lot of folks are in quarantine and they don't have the opportunities to get out and mingle and mix with other human beings as they once did. Like that, along with there are a lot more outlets for stories. There are so many more streaming services and websites and social network platforms where people can share stories. There's a lot. Those two worlds coming together. There's just so much more opportunities for creators.
What do you think? Talking about your finding your creative voice, what would you pinpoint to that? Like what specifically feels like Chris McDuffie?
I would say it's a fantasy-based reality. So I started out doing a lot of very flashy fashion work and editorial work in that realm, and that kind of aesthetic is certainly carried into other aspects of my work. I love bright colors, bright saturated colors. I love glitz and glamour. But even if it is telling a story about someone whose world doesn't revolve around that. Just finding that thread through it is what I appreciate and what I bring to each project.
That's beautiful. I like that. And it seems like you have kind of there's a complex lighting to your work. It's not just kind of bog standard stuff. It's well crafted. Is that, how have you kind of built your lighting style into your work?
Yeah, I think it comes from a lot of the early influences from photography. For me, were like the fashion photographies of the '90s and early aughts. Um, just really bright poppy colors, very flashy, big sets. For a long, long time, it was always my goal just to be that photographer on a huge set. I realize now that the business place hasn't quite gone in that direction. I don't know how many of those shoots are regular anymore. Um, there's things that contributed to that, like print dyeing. There aren't so many outlets for that anymore. But just that idea of having a very fantastic vision, very complex. I try to up the production value on every project.
And with that, I guess as a sort of segue here, with that complexity, with that creating that big visual style, I know for me personally, it's really easy to let my work kind of seep into my brain and into my life. Like, do you view your creative work as kind of, do you have to keep it separate from your life, or how do you think about that sort of work-life counterbalance?
That's a tough balance. I mean, especially working from home now, work's always there. It's always there. There's always something you could be doing, you could be working on, you could be planning, you could be scheduling. So it's important to kind of take that time away from work and have family time. But that's who I am. Like I'm a lifelong creative. There's no way around that. It'll always be a challenge to blend the two. I don't know that I'll ever find a very successful way to do that, but that's my quest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's a favorite picture that you've taken? Is there a most memorable image or most memorable project that just sticks with you, that's just always going to be there?
There is one, but it's nothing too sexy. I'd say the most memorable photo for me that I've ever taken. I don't think it's anywhere on the webs, but it was one of the first photos that really sparked my interest in photography as an art form, not just as something to document the world, but as an art form. I think it was in college, and it was during Hurricane Katrina. I went down to Florida on a family vacation. We got slammed by Katrina. We had no clue, how it was going to affect New Orleans and other parts of the country. But coming out of Katrina, kind of after the storm passed Florida, it washed a lot of wildlife onto the shore. And I went out one night, and there were a bunch of snails just on the pavement where we were staying. And I think I used the light from my phone to shine a light on the snail. I had a little point and shoot camera. I don't know, like a crappy Olympus 6 megapixel camera back in the day. And something about that photo of the snail on a road, with a little spotlight, I was taken aback by that. And I was like, oh, this is like really dope. This is a really cool picture. I want to make more pictures like this that I have this kind of connection to. And yeah, I've been chasing that high ever since, I suppose.
I love that. I think as photographers, we think the outside world thinks that our favorite pictures are the quote unquote most famous ones, but sometimes there's something about a photo that sticks with you for one reason or another, and you can't explain why. It's maybe not the best technical photo you've ever taken. It's maybe not even the best story, but there's something that just grabs you.
Absolutely. But and this was a time before I obviously didn't have a business. There was no career to manage. It was just again, it's just back to that being a creative and experimenting and not having any expectations.
All right, Chris, this has been an awesome conversation and such a great multifaceted creative discussion to get all our photographers and creators on the podcast kind of amped up. So we'll finish this off with a kind of a little lightning round of questions and then let people know where they can find out more about you.
Sounds good.
All right. What's the one thing in your bag you never leave home without?
I would say a multi-tool.
Oh, nice. Nice. What's the most important thing you've said no to in your career?
Oh my goodness. I said no to. I would say maybe it's not saying no. It wasn't pushing more aggressively towards a yes. And that would be to Prince. If I had to make that succinct, I said no to Prince.
Really?
So I know it's supposed to be lightning round, but I got to give some context.
Yeah.
So,
no, absolutely. Let's do it.
Prince had a band, Third Eye Girl, and there's a young woman who was interning for them at the time, and like reached out and said, the way that she worded it, she was trying to be vague, but like I knew who she was and I knew who she worked for. I was like, I know you're tied to Prince. But essentially, she sent an email just saying, I've got a band that I'm working with. I'd love for you to do some promo materials for them. Of course, I said yes, I'm on board, please. I don't think that I pushed as aggressively as I should have or could have. I didn't follow up in quite the right way. They went a different direction. That was like my opportunity, not only to work with Third Eye, but also Prince. Mm-hmm. That's still something that haunts me to this day.
Yeah. There's something to be said for making sure that you doggedly pursue the clients that you need to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you do outside of photography that recharges you?
Playing with the cats, having fun with the wife, having Zoom calls every Sunday with my extended family.
That's nice. Build that sort of regularity into your week.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to a student graduating from university that's thinking about a career in photography or cinematography?
I'd say go into it with your whole heart and really bet on yourself. That's something I didn't do early on. I don't feel that I did early enough, was really bet on myself and believe that I had what it would take to build a career.
And kind of piggybacking on that, what do you think separates good photographers from great ones?
Simplicity. Mm-hmm. And I would say the same for directors or cinematographers, just people that are able to make a really beautiful imagery in a very simplistic way.
All right. Well, lastly, but certainly not least, where can people find you online and see some more of your work?
All over the websites, all over the interwebs. chrismcduffie.photography is the website. You can find me on Instagram, McDuff Photo. You can find me on LinkedIn, it's Chris McDuffie.
Fantastic. Well, we will have links to all of Chris's social channels in the show notes of the episode. And Chris McDuffie, thank you so much for coming on the Photo Forward podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's amazing episode with Chris McDuffie. That's at McDuff Photo on Instagram. Definitely go check him out online and give him a follow. As we mentioned in the intro to today's episode, if you've got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I'll respond to AMA style, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect, or send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media. And we'll tackle those Q&As in some upcoming episodes. Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, engaging discussions about photography, creativity, or freelance business? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more engaging and intimate conversations with photographers, cinematographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page and drop a review to let me know how you all are enjoying the show, or even just a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make the show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. Thanks for listening, everyone, and as always, keep seeing, keep thinking, and keep putting your best photo forward. Catch you all in the next one.